So I've done a little research on this topic of stochastic terrorism, and it's a fascinating little rabbit hole that even if you just scratch a few layers deep, gets into some really weird, insidious nonsense. While some people are interested in the concept of stochastic terrorism because it's used in an extremely hypocritical manner by the left-wing progressives and commies and shit who invented the term, I don't want to go too far into the hypocrisy of it because what stochastic terrorism essentially is the concept of inciting violence without saying anything directly to incite violence. An example used in papers on the subject that I've read today, say like there was some king or some pope or something who had been like, won't somebody rid me of this fucking asshole bishop? And somebody fucking murdered the dude the same day. So they're like, well, even though he was just expressing an extreme disgust and disdain for this person, in fact, disgust, the concept of dehumanizing somebody through disgust, is considered the root of what stochastic terrorism is. That something is so intolerable that surely something must be done. And even if you don't say what should be done or even if anything should be done, just the expression of disgust is itself a form of terrorism and incitement to violence, which is an insane concept that makes no logical sense. Now, what's fascinating is, okay, so what does stochastic mean? Well, stochastic is like a mathematics term or a physics term that just means something that is randomly distributed. And the reason why it's used as a fancy, academic sounding word that comes before the word terrorism is the idea that there are lone wolves or random people who will interpret an expression of disgust and condemnation as a call to action. And that, of course, this, due to it being completely random and not a direct linkage, it's not a direct call of anything, that it's unpredictable. And therefore, the solution to stochastic terrorism is censorship. Now, since stochastic is like a mathematics term, well, how did it come to be involved in a political bullshit thing that is championed by people like the Young Turks and associated progressive far leftists and bloggers and such? Well, as far back as anybody can trace, the use of the words stochastic terrorism together dates back to some blogger, an anonymous blogger on a progressive left-wing political blog site called the Daily Kos or Daily KOS. It was founded by some, Salvadorian progressive douchebag, West Coast, asshole. But the Daily Kos is in itself its own weird little rabbit hole because it did just start as a blog site, like a Tumblr or a Reset Era, more particularly, or a NeoGAF. What is the Daily Kos now? Well, the Daily Kos now is a political super PAC, so it's directly tied in with politicians and has achieved access journalism status, getting posts from John Kerry, President Obama, President Carter, and shit on their site. Another fascinating contributor and collaborator of the Daily Kos is Hillary Clinton, which is hilarious because during the 2012 presidential election, when Hillary Clinton was rivaling Barack Obama, actually that was the 2008 presidential election. The Daily Kos was relatively new and popular at the time, amongst the people who would give a shit about that kind of toxic echo chamber, right? Back during that 2008 Obama campaign, the Daily Kos censored its own users for posting pro-Hillary Clinton shit, saying that, she was considered, an enemy of progress, basically, to put it in a summary. However, by 2016, the Daily Kos, of course, was not just a super PAC, it was also a polling organization that was cited, alongside polls like from Reuters and shit, right? And they expressly endorsed Hillary Clinton for presidency over, of course, Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is, being one of the first openly anti-progressive politicians in American history. That, of course, had to be immediately pushed back at any and all costs, including a progressive, trying to be forward-thinking and all-inclusive and all that good left-wing nonsense, endorsing a war criminal butcher and a raper of countries. Now, I don't mean rape as in sexual assault. I mean she literally raped Haiti of millions of dollars. If you look into the corruption of the the fucking Clinton Foundation and all that shit, you get into a rabbit hole of atrocities that goes way beyond the famous Clinton body count. We're talking about an organization that was like, oh yeah, Hope and Change in 2008 is endorsing a subhuman monster for president just because they're so scared of Trump and his stochastic terrorism. To get back on topic, stochastic terrorism, like I said, was a term coined by a blogger on that site called G2 Geek, who apparently there's no name info. This person's anonymous. And this influential blogger, it eventually spread to, like I said, through political connections. Whenever you see a new term come up, it doesn't really usually come from an academic source, and even if it did, we know the legitimacy of American academics is non-existent. But it comes from some asshole blogger who's on some blog site, a Reset Era clone type fucking blog site, that eventually becomes tied into the system. Because it's not just a blog site of independent journalists or commentators. It is a super PAC that has direct access and direct collaboration with Democratic progressive candidates, and it polls progressive readers. It's a site that has a few million people in traffic, 2 to 3 million people in traffic regularly per year since Donald Trump's election. Now, why is Donald Trump involved with the term stochastic terrorism? Why did the rise of the use of this word, which even though some people think they can trace it back or without citation to like 2011, it was a term invented around 2018. And especially has been used in the last couple of years since January 6th, So, of course, there is literally no evidence whatsoever that Donald Trump did anything to cause the January 6th riot. Meanwhile, there is significant and open to the public information that directly ties the FBI to inciting the riot, using plants, using agents, and basically literally agent provocateurs to incite the riot. And of course, we know on video that the police, the DC police and Capitol building security cooperated to allow this riot to occur. So even though there absolutely were random citizens going around vandalizing the Capitol building, it is a objective fact that January 6th was a false flag perpetrated by the actual Department of Justice through the FBI. Now, what does this again have to do with Trump now? Well, Trump has been censored. His YouTube channel was taken down, his Facebook account was taken down, Twitter account, all that shit, right? And why was Donald Trump censored from the internet in the exact same way that Alex Jones was censored from the internet? How, especially when we had a legal case where somebody successfully sued Donald Trump, the President of the United States, for blocking him on Twitter, and a court ruled that revoking access to the public communications on social media of a politician is a violation of the people's right to that information, in the same way that, it's a violation of the Freedom of Information Act and other legislation to essentially block Twitter users. And Twitter wanted to enforce that policy and said as much in cooperation with this court order. Meanwhile, how many dozens of Democrat and progressive candidates have blocked people, and people have complained, hey, there's a court order that says you can't do shit like this, and they try to sue. And, I haven't followed how many of those cases were successful in suing Democrat politicians for doing the same thing. But not to go too far into that topic. Now, why is it okay to literally completely censor the President of the United States while he was still in office, mind you? Donald Trump was still the acting president of the United States when he was censored from all these sites. And the cited reason was stochastic terrorism, that Donald Trump's words could incite violence whether or not he deliberately or accidentally did so. And that it was an interest of public security, of national security, to censor the President of the United States because of stochastic terrorism, which is a made-up term that, again, I remind you, means that just by expressing disdain, disgust, or disagreement with something, you are inciting violence against it. And now we're seeing that same principle being gone further and further and further into the LGBT agenda, that being expressly against, at least in certain spaces, LGBT stuff is actually an act of violence. You have literally transgender people online saying that removing child predator drag queens from elementary schools and public libraries, and to stop child drag shows, or to, not bring children to pride parades where buck naked men masturbate with dildos on floats in open air on the fucking street, that seeing pornographic and actual sex acts being performed in front of children. And in fact, we've had multiple cases again and again and again of elementary schoolers being taken into weird art exhibits that involve buck naked people being standing around and exposing their genitalia to these children, which is a sex crime. It's a felony that you go to jail, where fricking the scum of the earth, worst criminals in the world would, you can't put them in general population with those people, because these scum of the earth that we don't allow in society would also not tolerate you for being that monstrous. You understand? And what I'm saying right now, saying that even the worst criminals that we imprison and remove from society by law would kill you if they saw you, because they find you that abhorrent. Me saying that to my audience is the definition of stochastic terrorism. Because did I say it's okay that anybody harms these people? Did I say any of these people should harm any of these people? No, I said that I find these people detestable. I said that what they are doing is criminal, in violation of a law, and that anybody, even the worst people you can imagine, would find these people I'm talking about as beneath them. So I've dehumanized these examples, meaning child predators of the LGBT persuasion, right? I've said that they're abhorrent, that what they do is illegal, and that literally anybody, if given the opportunity, would harm them. Now, what that is stochastic terrorism, basically, because keep in mind that especially when it comes to, say, Donald Trump, I've involved the legal aspect of it, that sexually abusing children is criminal, and that the law enforcement, the judiciary system, and indeed the politicians and representatives of our United States government have not only refused to enforce the law, refused to protect innocent children from these people, but in fact have endorsed these child predators, have invited them onto the White House, have let them give speeches before Congress, have done everything they can to protect these people's ability to assault children. So the fact that I've brought the law into this is another element of stochastic terrorism, which is heavily focused upon by advocates of this term, stochastic terrorism, that when you say somebody is a criminal, and that the law will do nothing about these criminals, that just saying that fact, that there are child predators that are allowed free access to assault children in violation of sex offender registry law, in violation of human decency, and again, in violation of the law in terms of sexually assaulting children. The fact that I brought the law into this is considered under the idea of stochastic terrorism to incite vigilantism. Just the fact that I'm saying that there are these people doing these horrible things, that everybody detests them, and what they're doing is actively illegal under our agreed upon civilized society and our legal code, that because nobody's doing something about this implies that I think you should. Okay? Which of course I am not saying. But what is the purpose of stochastic terrorism as a concept? To silence dissent and to shield and cover criminals. Because, the whole election law thing, now that the midterms have been over and that the 2024 race hasn't gotten into full swing, YouTube has temporarily removed some stuff that I've had some guidelines under the TOS that I've had videos taken down in apparent violation of, which is discussing, say, things like voter fraud. Now, if Donald Trump were to say, hey, this election's not legitimate, and I may or may not have said in the past similar things, which I don't plan on getting strikes for doing that now. So let's just say that, yeah, Donald Trump said this election's illegitimate and stolen, and that he organized a protest, and that he encouraged people to protest peaceably outside the Capitol. That was considered an act of stochastic terrorism so egregious that Donald Trump was indicted by Congress for trying to institute a coup against the United States government, to take over said government and to harm or kill representatives of the government, and to stop the, I forget the term is, the validation of the election through Congress. Even though he said no such thing. He was indicted twice for that, and they've since gone on many witch hunts after that, and of course there was the Mueller investigation, which was a complete hoax before that. And all because this one guy, who I'm not the biggest fan of Trump, and it's not because I think he's a bad president. In fact, he's the best president we've had in a century. It's because I don't think he really is the champion of the people that he claims to be, and that's not why I'm his biggest fan. But do I think he was correct about the nature of our government, about what he called the deep state or the swamp? Well, again, this is the last thing I swear. Every time somebody says, when there was censorship online, that it was done at the behest of just corporate dudes who run private companies. Again, legally, through court precedent, places like Twitter are considered something like the public square. They are official sources of information dissemination. And it's not just politically. The National Weather Service issues warnings and shit through this. It's used. Twitter, among many other social media sites, including YouTube, are used as direct contact measures for the president to speak, or a politician to speak to the American people, same as, Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt famously was one of the first presidents to directly address the nation through radio and shit. Well, now we have politicians directly addressing the nation through Twitter, and Twitter should be considered not a private company, but a public utility like radio is. And it should be operating under FCC law, and in some ways it is, and in some ways it is considered completely exempt from the law of the FCC. It gets to sit in this realm where it gets to do whatever it wants when it's convenient, and then whenever else it considers it convenient, we're a legally regulated, FCC compliant, public utility, public information access type thing. And legally, that's what it is. However, there's been zero enforcement of Twitter violating the First Amendment in full, complete criminality against legal code. But people try to say, it's a private company that you use via consent, that it's not beholden to any law, and they can do whatever they want. Even if that were true, is it them making this decision? No. Donald Trump was removed from all these sites at the behest of the FBI, which is supposed to be a federal interstate police force that chases lawbreakers that cross state boundaries and all that shit. They come from the Pinkertons, who are a fucking mercenary group that would chase criminals and gangsters and bootleggers like John Dillinger across state lines where state police couldn't follow them, right? Well, now they are basically a federal police force that is beholden to the federal government and supersedes state law and is allowed to step in on whatever investigation they want to, which is already a violation of their mandate. And now what the FBI is the Gestapo, the secret police of the Democratic Party. And everything they do is designed to enforce the Democratic Party's will, including pursuing people who speak out against child predators of the rainbow persuasion, including silencing journalists, silencing politicians, silencing protesters, silencing citizens, and indeed silencing the President of the United States simply because he's got an R after his name instead of a D. It is not a private company making a personal decision not to associate with certain kinds of content. It is a federally, legally regulated utility operating illegally on behalf of a federal interest in the political system, illegally using a secret police, which itself is unconstitutional. The FBI cannot legally exist, and yet it does. The government cannot legally violate the First Amendment, and yet it does, directly. And with such hubris that they didn't even try to hide it. All it took was Elon Musk going into Twitter, getting access to their internal communiques, which were no way coded or were no way hidden. These people publicly discussed violating the law. And not only that, what's fascinating is Twitter publicly discussed amongst themselves discomfort with the idea of allowing the FBI to do something they knew was criminal. But they decided to collaborate, first of all, yes, because they're against Trump, but also, hey, it's the fucking FBI telling us what to do and insisting we operate in tandem with their interests and their agenda, and that we should do as they say, for our own benefit. It's just better to let the government violate the law in high treason than to take any kind of principled stand, or indeed to act like a private company and tell the government to fuck off. Because that is actually something that's within their rights. If they're a private company and they're actually not beholden to FCC regulation, and they're not beholden to government oversight or stricture, then they should be able to just tell the FBI, go fuck yourself. But they don't. So what you're seeing is a political schism in this country that's so odd, because ultimately, if you look at actually congressional people making laws and shit and actually doing shit, you're mostly seeing people acting in tandem. Republicans and Democrats acting in tandem to do corrupt things, to piss our money away on foreign wars and violate the sovereign soil of other nations, to manipulate markets in other countries, to blackmail and to illegally surveil other presidents and prime ministers of other countries, which we do on the regular. America is a criminal country that doesn't respect international law. It doesn't respect its own law. It wipes its ass with the Constitution. The United States is the great Satan. And there's a reason why everybody hates us. Now, to actually finish and get back on the topic of stochastic terrorism, it is, like all things the progressives say they are against, one of their chief weapons. The classic thing that everybody always mentions, Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. One of the rules is always accuse your enemy of what you yourself are doing before he has the chance to accuse you first. Stochastic terrorism is the primary way that Black Lives Matter was allowed to destroy this country, to kill over 60 people, to cause over $2.2 billion in damage, and to create a scam that is barely even being investigated to this day, where, again, over $2 billion was funded into this organization, Black Lives Matter, like it's supposedly a charity, when it was indeed just pocketed by the executives of that nonprofit and used to buy real estate in order to hold it as wealth and to not distribute it to anyone. And in fact, many fragments of Black Lives Matter have had their nonprofit status removed for doing no charitable actions. They just pocketed all your money. And that, Antifa is a terrorist organization, but it is protected by these same sorts of scammers, not just like these blog slash political think tanks like Daily Kos. Antifa is claimed by politicians such as Adam Schiff, such as what's her name? I forget. Not Adam Schiff. There's another guy I can't remember off the top of my name. Jerry Nadler, of course, famously said Antifa doesn't exist. Maxine Waters said Antifa doesn't exist. Nancy Pelosi says Antifa doesn't exist. It's a multinational, highly organized criminal terrorist organization that often does operate with either tacit or explicit and direct support from politicians. So we have politicians funding literal violent terrorism, expressing support for violent terrorism that is not, or not, at least not apparently government affiliated, like Black Lives Matter, although there's conspiracy theories of collaborations, at least with local mayors and local governors of states, in order to not just allow them to wreak havoc on the public, to kill people, and to burn down businesses and loot stores and assault random civilians, destroy private property, threaten homeowners and such. But there's evidence that they've gone out there and put down pallets and bricks. There's people coming out of U-Hauls with ready-made signs to show up to these protests. And we've seen agent provocateurs going into otherwise peaceful, progressive, lefty, libtard protests and whipping them up into a frenzy. We've seen this over and over again. In the same way that feds have infiltrated so many right-wing online spaces and incited them to violence, January 6th being a chief example, I think that a lot of the Black Lives Matter riots and Antifa riots were not originally intended to be such by the participants, but were whipped up into such a frenzy by agent provocateurs who were members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Therefore, every time I tell you, every video, that the government is your enemy, it is not only your enemy, but it will assault and kill you and steal from you at every given opportunity, and it will do it under cover of law enforcement and public security. And that America is an oligarchic, even though I hate to use this word because it's a loaded word in itself, is linguistically used improperly, but what most people would colloquially call something that is a fascist dictatorship is what the United States is. You live in, although this is not a technically accurate term, what an average layman would consider a correct term, fascist dictatorship. You do not live in a democracy. You do not live in a republic. You live in an oligarchy that is controlled by economic interests in media, economic interests in science and research and development, economic interests in the military-industrial complex, and in the interests of global trade. One of the main things that Trump did that really set off left-wing hate of him wasn't just saying that, oh, Mexico's not sending its best, was when he pulled us out of a big international trade deal. That lost a lot of very evil people, a lot of very, very, very large 10-figure amounts of money. That means over $1 billion. So we invent these terms and justifications to use that the House Judicial Committee, the House Special Investigations Committee, and all that shit, to use the FBI, to use the Department of Homeland Security to target, indeed, politicians that are duly elected to the United States government and at its highest levels into the executive branch, right? And they love using words to bring this all the way back down from the great big dark conspiracy to the simple linguistic terms that while they are funding, orchestrating, and planning terrorism against the innocent citizens, the civilians of the United States, many of which who have no political interest and simply want their properties not to be burned down, to not be gunned down in the streets by strangers, to not have their cars flipped and burned, okay? To not be maligned by cancel culture, which is to me meaningless in the face of literal terrorism, murder, and death. But even then, to be fired from their jobs, to have their livelihoods attacked, and to have their innocent family members weren't related to whatever reason they were targeted to also be harmed in the exact same way, which I consider to be literal violence, even though it doesn't contain a physical act, and it contains theft, robbery, harm, slander, all things that are criminal, by the way, and can be at least prosecuted in civilian court, if not in actual fucking, go to jail court. All this shit. And these people have the balls to say that if you dissent, if you verbally and explicitly disagree, and if you express disgust at the monsters, the actual literal killers and criminals that these people literally are, that the entire video that you've just watched for 30 minutes is itself stochastic terrorism. If you say no, you're not allowed to rape and mutilate our children. You're not allowed to burn down our cities. You're not allowed to kill our neighbors. You're not allowed to rape our women. You're not allowed to completely wipe your ass with the law of this land that produced the greatest society world has ever known, and the most wealthy, decadent, and successful society that the world has ever known. You're not allowed to do this without me telling you that what you're doing is wrong. Well, me telling these people that they are wrong and that they are evil is stochastic terrorism. This video is stochastic terrorism. Now, of course, do I deliberately want you to do anything? No, but I want you to be aware of the reality that you live in and aware of the twisted lies, the pure fucking Orwellian bullshit that you're looking at, Huxleyan bullshit that you're looking at, and realize that you are not free. You don't live in a real first world society. You live in a cage and in a prison, and that you have no rights and that you have no reasonable expectation of safety. And even if you look outside right now and hear nothing but crickets, look back into history, look back into every evil regime from Pol Pot to the Bolshevik Revolution, look for, the Nazi takeover of Germany and World War II. Look at all the bad guys back and back and back and back, all the way to the Attila the Huns and shit. And everyone loves to play Monday morning quarterback and go criticize that football game from way back when and say, how come nobody did anything? Because there were so many people who were complicit. How many times when Rome was sacked did some traitor open the gates? That's what you're looking at right now. The Huns and the Vandals are in the city. The gates are open. The guard is nowhere to be found. In fact, the guard is helping them loot. The guard is helping them rape the women. The guard is helping them impale the children on fucking spikes. Okay? Right now. And everyone's just like, well, just go watch my Disney Plus and do nothing about it. Well, all I want you to do is be aware of the reality you live in. And be aware that you are at a moment in history that will be looked at in the future as pivotal. And all I'm asking you is at least to not look away. At least to not put your fingers in your ears. At least to not cover your mouth. At least to not cover your eyes. Most of you people would rather blind yourself than even look at this. All I'm asking you to do is look.